now we move to the third presentation by, one of the co-organizers of this event, so you know him already, Leandro. And so Leandro is a professor at the Faculty of Architecture in São Paulo, and indeed, let's say, one of the initiators of this series of seminars. And well, in São Paulo, Leandro is part of the of a group that of theory at the Faculty of Architecture of the University of São Paulo. Leandro got his PhD in São Paulo, but he's also been, let's say, in Europe for a master's degree in Catalonia and a postdoctoral fellowship in Madrid. So Spain is also part of Leandro's trajectory, and he's one of the, let's say, the coordinators of the chair of the research committee at FAU USP in São Paulo, and also the editor-in-chief of, let's say, the scholarly journal Revista do POS. And so, of course, he has been dealing with different topics, comparative urban studies, urban space, collective housing, and social housing are among his central themes of his research. So, welcome, Leandro. The floor is yours, and, well, looking forward to it.
In my presentation in 21 seminar, I'll talk about the post-critical concept. When I sought to demonstrate that post-criticism did not give the discipline the same symbolic value and the social function as in avant-garde times. Moreover, it hid the contradiction of neoliberalism in relation to architecture and urbanism. After all, behind the brilliance of architecture of spectacle and the strategic planning grew up a ideological machine of domination. Domination of the body, domination of the mind, domination of the space. When it comes to social housing, the contradiction of the model are even more evident, as they can consolidate process of exclusion and make our future unfeasible. We know that the economic and political nature of social programs has deeply shaken by the neoliberal model. By drastically reducing the role of the state in social ordering, it determines the end of the welfare state as widespread in many countries, especially here in Europe. The new model has two decisive consequences for the field of social housing. Firstly, the process of typological, technical, and programmatic experimentation, when dissociated from state orders, have lost ground for the pragmatism, conservatism, and ambition from profit imposed by the real market states. Secondly, the globalized financial market has taken place of the state banks in relation to finance strategy for popular housing production, which replaces its effective social character in favor of speculative maneuvers that culminate in the 2008 crisis. Post-criticism being itself a consequence of neoliberalism offer no tools for analyzing this phenomenon whose most serious consequences are relatively recent, mainly in the field of urban policy dedicated to the social inclusion. The issue of housing, especially social housing, is intrinsically linked to the political, economic, social, and cultural models that affect the contemporary society. Its contradiction must take place on the urban scale. Its confrontation, and so, like the Lefebvrean concept of urbanism, it cannot be partial. After all, it must contemplate all fields in action in the urban space. Thus, discern between parts and whole, and understand the limits of housing in the contemporary city becomes the major disciplinary issues in terms of collective housing and social housing. This is not a trivial task, since the market forces and the logic of policies and even the academic and professional structures tend to divide the issues into specific fields, in partial fields. It was in this context that, Even in a period of a progressive administration, one of the world's largest and the most controversial housing program emerges, the My House, My Life, Minha Casa, Minha Vida. The goal of the program was to build more than 1 million homes per year through a partnership with the private sector. The financial engineer of the program was exemplary and managed to reach its goal at least until the 2006 COP. However, the My House, My Life did not contemplate demands essential for the broad concept of housing, and instead as a process of socialization towards the urban, towards the city. The program had a rude impact on the academy. To date, more than 2,000 studies on the subject have been published in indexed journals, congress, and PhD theses. It's too much. The My House, My Life is a clear model of spatial domination of neoliberalism in relation to the working class, a kind of appeasing segregation. The neoliberal economic model, which has been declining since the beginning of the 21st century, in accord with some authors like René Passet, Tony Judt, David Harvard, Thomas Piketty, and others, has its legitimacy brutally reached after the economic crisis of 2008. The virtuous cycle of flexible capital and associated with the architecture of spectacle and strategic planning collapsed. After all, their virtuous project for the near future had no base in social and productive reality of the world. Thus, the result of the crisis rendered obsolete the main arguments of those who advocate for the end of criticism, the end of theory, the end of social function in architecture and urbanism. In this sense, it's happy to the project at the disciplinary level, the ambition to stand before this agreement demands in recent years, which make the criticism and theory decisive, since the old models, the modern or post-modern, no longer function in the face of perverse market strategies of neoliberal policies. And in the face of the clash between progressive and conservative force, which are also spreading on a global scale, urban space and the territorial dominance play a fundamental role, especially against exclusion. After all, the social division by territorial segregation strategies, stimulated by a careful controlled life, accentuate inequalities arising from the neoliberal economy. Individualism and alienation become social patterns, as we see in gated communities, for example, as Sanity uses say in this new book. It's not a new problem. What's new is the critical perspective. It's the understood that without solving the structural problem of urbanization process, the future of the city and the society will be compromised. Especially in the case of countries such as Brazil, where the state collapse occurs in the context marked by the inequality. In other words, the neoliberalism recommends the destitution of the states that did not even exist, in fact. The city has been the scene of this obvious contradiction, and the movements against the privatization of urban commons are growing by the day. The most recently was last week, not only in Brazil, but in Chile. Everybody knows that Chile has a problem now about this kind of issues. The city should be the place of inclusion, but what we see is the opposite in most parts of the world now. Some beautiful images just for change the mood. One of the most compelling concepts of real-life works was the city would have a spatial conformation, direct relating to the daily practices. A practical sensitive surface. For Lefebvre, the city, as at least in the Western tradition, would be the result of a tension established between the daily needs and of certain groups and the interaction with the symbolic and collective contents. I'm coming from Delft, another ominous. In this way, the city stems from the slow and gradual sedimentation of collective desires. In other words, the city would be the oeuvre, a common work of the community, and therefore the synthesis. In this context, according to Lefebvre, the urban and the study of urban society cannot dispense this practical sensitive basis, a morphology, because that would be the basis of which the space of everyday life are represented. That is, the possibilities of multiple relationships, the symbolic and the cultural contents, and the reflection about the urban things. After all, as Henri Lefebvre words, the urban is not a soul, a spirit, a philosophical entity. The urban is something really real. In this sense, I remember Lefebvre's analysis of the city of Montreuil in France, published in the book Introduction of Modernity from 1962. A new city, designed in 1958, following the concepts of a modern movement. The rational logic of the Montreuil seemed to fit the purpose of machinery and the productive force. After all, nothing was missing. His understanding of the city of Montreuil or other modern city emphasized the high-fi nature of the buildings, whose rational autonomy disarticulated then from the expected unity in the urban. Urbanization as a sum of isolated objects with their independent narratives seems to promote a market and capital strategy, nothing more. After all, displaced from the logic of the city, which articulates space, collective subjectivities, and common goods, and displaced also for the vanguard in utopian thought, everything becomes commodity, project and by exchange value. What makes the modern city a harbinger of the postmodern city, of the neoliberal city, and of the transnational city, capital city, and of the generic city. As we saw with Adorno and Recamán in the Alex of Enlightenment from 1947, instrumental reason gives room for the ideological interest, capable to manipulate good emancipatory intention, fascism established in the light of progress and reason. What thought of as a whole would collapse toward the efficiency of parts. The city is no longer a collective work. In other words, is the end of the city, is the end of the urban, is the end of the rural, is the end of the nature, is the end of the world. By segregating nature, by desegregating nature, and the option for superficial and palliative solution for complex contradiction of contemporary society, formal cities nullify or make impossible any movements towards the urban, towards the socialization of society. In this context, Lefebvre's insight into Montreuil is visionary. There is come a moment when all forces began growing for themselves, almost as though they were autonomous: technology, demography, art, science, etc. Everything becomes disjoint, yet everything becomes a totality. Everything becomes hi-fi, yet everything starts disintegrating. The aleatory is triumphant, Lefebvre words. The neoliberal city is the modern city without utopian ideal. The neoliberal city is the modern city without utopian ideal of social transformation. We must move to the new spatial and the social utopias. There is no alternative now. We have to change the way that we look at our cities and the way that we administrate our urban areas. To end this presentation in a more optimistic tone, I present some proposal of social housing building and design in the first decade of the century in the city of São Paulo. I'm finalized now a book about this project, which should be published in the early of 2020. This project seems to propose through diverse strategies what we call in our group alternative configuration or experimental utopias in relation to local practices. The existence oops. Sorry about that. Well, sorry about that. It's not. My intention is to understand their spatial proposal and to verify how they can intervene in the daily life of their residents and in the everyday life of the city of São Paulo. That is a balancing between strategies and tactics. Well, 1 minute with the image. I suppose that is okay. Thank you very much.